Um, Thank you. Great. So we are recording this. So there'll be lots to share afterwards. But again, Made by Mountains, we're connecting and growing the outdoor recreation economy across 25 counties in the Qualla boundary in Western North Carolina. And we're doing that through these 3 pillars of work: growing the outdoor industry, working really closely with our business network. We're amplifying outdoor culture through our marketing arms, and then building outdoor communities, which a lot of you here on this call are a part of today. Our deep intentional community work that we're doing, and that the data that we're here to talk about is really going to support. So we've got a small and mighty team that's doing this work every day, and you'll see some of the folks from our team here on this call: Brad Spiegel, Joanna Brown, and our newest member of our team, Allison Smith, who you will all meet soon. Our work is possible through our funding sponsors: Appalachian Regional Commission, Dogwood Health Trust, and Mountain BizWorks. They allow us to do all of this deep community work daily, and to really have folks in the region waking up every day thinking about this and working on this with all of you. A couple of little housekeeping tips. Like I said, we are going to be recording this webinar, and we'll also have the chat open. So we're going to have time for question and answer at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions that come up along the way, feel free to pop those into the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. So we are really, really excited about the data and the information that we're going to be sharing here today. It's really some incredible outdoor recreation participation data, and it is absolutely groundbreaking. The more and more that we have been digging into it over the past couple of months, we're just blown away as kind of the insight that it provides to our region and folks who are coming here to recreate. It's really going to provide invaluable insight to help us inform our strategic decision-making, to help advance economic development, and to achieve our community goals, while also really ensuring that we're focusing on sustainable and responsible tourism and planning practices. So with that, enough from me. We're going to get into what we're really here to talk about. And so I want to recognize the team that we've worked closely with to gather this data and put the survey together. And so we've got joining us Ash Morgan from App State University, Melissa Weddle from University of Montana, and John Whitehead also from App State University. And so we're going to pass it over to them. I'm going to hand it off to Melissa now to really dive in. Melissa, I think you're muted.
I can't believe I did that. Good morning. Thanks, Amy. My name is Melissa Weddle. Some of you remember me. I was at Appalachian State in the Recreation Management program, and have worked with Ash and John, our esteemed economists, for many years. I took a position at the University of Montana at a research institute for tourism and outdoor recreation, and I'm so grateful to have continued this work. Western North Carolina runs deep in my heart, so we're excited to be here. If you go next. So part of what we've shared today in the press release on the website has been almost 2 years worth of work. We have a curriculum program with building outdoor communities, but then the other part of this work is looking at the economic impact of recreationists in Western North Carolina. Many of you know, you hear the word economic impact. It estimates the total dollars, jobs, household income generated in the economy due to something new. And that can be a new business growing in the region, a construction event. For our purposes, it is an outdoor recreation asset, and those can be a lot of different things, we know. And what's so critical about having these, especially for regions and counties, which we're releasing, is that in order to get further funding, to get more capacity, people want to know the impacts of what they're bringing into the community. So one of the drawbacks of this, though, that we all know, working in outdoor recreation, is it doesn't necessarily account for positive social, environmental, or cultural impacts. So that is certainly a key to this. And so with this said, I'm going to turn it over to John to talk about our participation survey.
Hey everybody, this is John. So we conducted our data with an internet survey. This is the way that much of the social science and business research is being collected these days. And
All right, that sounds good. Appreciate it.
we were looking for, we needed decent sized samples from each of the counties in the Qualla boundary in terms of where people visited for their outdoor recreation trip. So we went with Donata as the sample vendor. So we did an internet survey, and Donata provided the sample. They have a huge sample of consumers and households. Probably the biggest sample that's providing data for social science research that's in the business. So we used Donata, and that allowed us to contact over 5,000 survey respondents from 5 states. And I'll talk about these states in a second. So we wanted to focus our research on people who participated in outdoor recreation in Western North Carolina. And so about a third of the people that we initially contacted met that criteria. The numbers that you'll see are all from this sample of 1,786 people from 5 of the top 6 states of origin for overnight visitors to Western North Carolina. So those states are Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. And these 5 states account for about 2/3 of all overnight visitors to Western North Carolina. Next slide. Okay, so this chart shows these 5 states, and the taller bars in the lighter color to the left tells us the numbers that initially responded to the survey. And the number on the left, you can see we got between 2,000 and 3,000 North Carolinians who initially responded to the survey. And then the lower bar in the darker color on the right is the number of those people who initially responded who participated in outdoor recreation in Western North Carolina. And you can see that the participation rate is highest in North Carolina, which makes sense because for much of us, the travel distance to this region is lower. And so the cost of arriving is lower than in these other states. Next slide. And so it's important just to check to see if the sample, these 1,786 people and who represent those households, if that looks similar to the population that they're drawn from. And if not, you might want to use weighting methods or other ways to make the sample more representative. So in this table, we're comparing 4 demographic variables from our sample of 1,786 to the numbers from the U.S. Census population estimates. So we find that in terms of the racial composition, education, and age, that our sample looks very similar to the population. And in terms of the survey respondents' gender, we have more females than is in the population. And we think that's okay because the survey respondent is answering for a household. And so we like the way our sample looks, and we think it's fairly representative of the folks that we wanted to talk to. Next slide. Okay, so then we did an analysis just to see from that larger sample of over 5,000 survey respondents. We did an analysis to see who participated in outdoor recreation in Western North Carolina and who did not. And so this analysis is to see if that selection into our analysis sample makes sense, first of all, and then just a snapshot of who's in our sample. It gives us a snapshot of who's in our sample. So back, yeah, there we go. So we found that so the middle column there participates. These are the people who participate in outdoor recreation in Western North Carolina. So we find that people who are younger, who have higher household incomes, are more likely to participate and to be in our final sample. Female respondents are less likely to be in our final sample. White households are more likely to be in our sample. Survey respondents who graduate from a four-year college are more likely to be in our sample. And North Carolina residents are more likely to be in our sample. And our sample, again, is folks who participate in outdoor recreation. And so these results are similar to what you find in other studies. And so again, we think that our sample composition is a pretty good one and worthy of further analysis. So next slide. Okay, a lot of the estimates that you'll see when Ash Morgan begins, a lot of it is based on the number of trips that people take to this region. So here we have our 5 states of origin. In the middle column is the sample size. If you add up those numbers, that should be about 1,786. And then for each of those, then the average number of annual trips, outdoor recreation trips to Western North Carolina is in the 3rd column, annual trips. So people from North Carolina take about 5 trips on average. People from Tennessee, 4, Georgia, 3.5, and then South Carolina and Virginia, folks from those origin states take about 3 trips to Western North Carolina. And again, this is the sample that includes anyone who took at least 1 trip. Next slide. Okay, we know the destination for these trips. We asked people if you're from North Carolina and you took 5 trips to Western North Carolina, where you took each trip. And so the most popular destinations, and these are the ones that all have represent at least 10% of the trips, are the counties along the bottom of this graph. And then the number on the left is the percentage of the trip. So Buncombe County, about 29% of the trips had Buncombe County as a destination. Watauga County, about 15% of the trips were Watauga was the destination. And then Cherokee, Allegheny, Ashe, Avery, Henderson, and Jackson, they received between 10 and 14% of all of these trips. Next. And then we also had a long list of activities that folks could participate in once they arrived at their destination. And these are just 5 of the top activities. About half of all folks went hiking. Almost half did some sort of nature viewing. About a third went fishing. 22% were car camping on their trip. And 16% went mountain biking. Next slide, and I'll turn it over to Ash Morgan.
Right. Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, taking that on from John there. So after collecting data on from the survey on those number of trips and the destinations, we also wanted to look at ask some questions about the most recent trip. And really the purpose of this is just to get some more information about the individual's trip-taking behavior, but also spending patterns by economic sector. That's going to be really important for us in terms of developing the economic model that will provide the economic impact results. And so just some takeaways from, again, questions specifically looking at the most recent trip. Roughly 2/3 of respondents took an overnight trip as opposed to a day trip. 39% of those overnight stays are for 2 nights. I believe the average length of stay for those who stayed overnight was 2.5 nights. We asked questions for those who stayed overnight, the type of accommodation that they stayed in. The modal response, the most popular was hotel and motel. So about 2/5 of respondents staying in that type of accommodation. Roughly 1/3 traveling with one other person. We also asked questions about the level of satisfaction with the most recent trip. We did that, I believe, on a 5-point Likert scale ranging from very unsatisfied to very satisfied. And about 3/4 of the respondents were very satisfied with their experience on their most recent trip. And close to another 20% was satisfied. So when you couple that together, you've got, I believe, 94% of respondents were either satisfied or very satisfied with their most recent trip. And then 83% told us that this most recent trip was a typical trip for them. Next, please, Brad. And so here's the breakdown of the type of accommodation from for those who stayed overnight. Again, the most popular response was to stay in a hotel or a motel. And then we had those staying in campers or RVs. And then after that, roughly, you've got about 10% of respondents saying that they stayed with friends, 10% in some sort of rental home, like a VRBO perhaps, and then a further 10% at a campground. Next, please. And again, a really important component of this was for us to help to understand the spending that's associated with these trips. And so the average spending per trip, we estimate to be $479. And so that's very important for us to know, but really more important than that is to understand the breakdown of those spending levels. So when they're coming into your specific county and they're spending on average $479, where are they spending that money? So next, please, Brad. And so this, again, just based on the average, is a breakdown of those spending categories. And again, this is important for us in the economic modeling because $100, for example, spent in a lodging in a hotel doesn't necessarily have the same economic impact as $100 dropped in a restaurant or $100 dropped in a movie theater. So we need to know the breakdown of those spending patterns. And as you can see, lodging is the highest level of spending. That's receiving the most spending, $124 per trip, again, on average, followed by restaurants, gasoline, entertainment, and then you can read on down. But for us to get a breakdown of this is very important. These essentially are what we call a direct effects. So these spending categories and this spending flow is the money that's coming into the economic system, which for us is Northwest North Carolina. All those people from them surrounding, well, within other parts of North Carolina and the surrounding states that John mentioned, coming in for the principal purpose of a recreational activity, bringing their money with them, spending that money on the recreational activity, but also spending the money on these different sectors, the lodging and restaurants. That's kickstarting the process. Those are what we call direct effects. And then so we capture that from the survey, and then we put those spending levels at the county level in our model, And then what the model is going to do next is help us understand, well, what happens next? And we call that the secondary effects. So just to sort of provide a story, you can imagine a family coming in. I'll pick on with Torga County because that's where I am right now. Coming in, spending a day hiking. They then go to the Boone Saloon for dinner. They drop $300 in the Boone Saloon. That's a direct level of spending. And we're capturing that right there in that restaurant spending category. That then kickstarts a chain reaction of other spending. As the Boone Saloon then goes and spends money on its suppliers locally, we technically call that an indirect effect, a business-to-business transaction. But then also the income that's generated locally from that direct spending levels. Then workers at the Boone Saloon take a portion of that income and on the way home, pick up groceries for the family. That's technically what we call an induced effect. But those are these combined, those are our secondary effects. When we add those three levels of spending together, the direct, the indirect, and the induced, then we get the total. So next, please, Brad. And that gives us the total annual economic impacts from recreational induced spending. And so we can present those impacts in different ways. And so one reason why economic impact studies like this are very popular is because the output, the metrics are readily understandable. And so one way of presenting the economic impacts are to think about the jobs that have been created through these levels of spending. And so we report that. And so just the direct spending that comes in creates roughly 38,000 jobs, again, across Northwest North Carolina. If you then look at the secondary flows, those what we call the multiplier effects, then that creates an additional roughly 12,000 jobs. So if you add those two together, then roughly we're getting 48,000 jobs created within our Northwest North Carolina system associated with recreational spending. However, all jobs aren't created equally, right? So a job in Bojangles isn't the same as a job in, a rental office or a marketing department. So we also report income. And so these, of course, are in dollars. These are in millions. So the total income annually created, when we create all these jobs, that will create roughly $1.5 billion annually in income across Northwest North Carolina. And then finally, output or gross regional product, really just sales, which is probably the metric that you see the most reported. That's $3.4 billion in additional sales directly. When you look at the totals, when you include the secondary effects, that goes up to just shy of $4.9 billion. So we can think of the annual economic impacts associated with recreation trips to Northwest North Carolina as approximately $4.9 billion. And so this is, again, one way of capturing the economic impacts, very popular way of doing it, as I mentioned, because these metrics are understandable. Next, please, Brad. Also, when we look at recreational opportunities, we often measure and provide another way of looking at economic benefit that we call consumer surplus. So certainly less readily understandable than the economic impact way. As you see there, consumer surplus, the definition is the additional benefit to the traveler, in this case, over and above their spending. If I'm in the classroom, as I often am, I'm talking about consumer surplus. The way I try to sort of describe it, to define it, would be I usually talk about a concert, because students go to concerts. I'll say, okay, who's been to a concert recently? And then the hands go up. Okay, I'll pick on someone. Who did you go and see? And of course, it's always Taylor Swift. And so I'll talk about, okay, how much did you spend to go and see Taylor Swift? How much did you pay? And it's Taylor Swift. So $400. So, okay. How was the experience? Did you enjoy the concert? And there's always, yes, absolutely fantastic. So I'll say, well, how much would you pay for a ticket? And they'll give me a number. Say, oh, I loved it. So $1,000. Okay. And so from that, we can tease out that consumer surplus. So they would have paid $1,000. They only had to pay $400. So we would look at that and said, and say, okay, you got $600 worth of satisfaction from this experience that you didn't have to pay for. So that's what we use to capture consumer surplus. And again, this is a way of capturing an economic benefit. And it's a perfect measure here for recreational experience because it's the same idea. It's the level of satisfaction you got from the recreational trip over and above what you had to pay for it. And so this was measured for us in terms of consumer surplus per person per day at $25. The U.S. Forest Service makes very similar estimates. It's done it when it's broken this out per activity, and its consumer surplus measures per person per activity day. They range from about $21 from a backpacking activity up to $139 for non-motorized boating activity. So our estimate's falling in that range. If you aggregate that up based on the number of days and number of people, then we get this annual aggregate benefit of $1.5 billion associated with these recreation trips. Next one, please, Brad. I'm really here just to, Melissa did a very nice job of taking us a lot of information here and compiling it and producing an infographic. The infographic is available in the press release packet. It's also on the Made by Mountains website. This is just really summarizing what we talked about in terms of those economic impact numbers of $4.9 billion of additional annual economic output associated with these trips. Again, another way of thinking about that is 48,000 full-time equivalent jobs. Next, please, Brad. And then some of the other findings that, again, John talked about the popular activities. And then again, the $479 average spending and the very high level of respondents that were satisfied or very satisfied with the trip. So again, you can take, all these takeaways are all provided in the infographic. Next, please, Brad. So I believe that really tries to summarize very quickly the economic impacts and the economic benefits measured and captured by the survey and the analysis. Now, Melissa is going to come back and talk about how to use the data.
Thank you, Ash and John. That was condensed into a very short time frame, and they made a lot of magic happen. This is the foundation of all the reports and the county level data that will be forthcoming. So this is exciting. I just want to thank them for all of this work. I felt like I just sat through another econ class, and I love it. When you kind of saw those infographics that we had that you'll see on the press release. And so that really opens up this conversation of how do you use this data? I think one of the most challenging parts of collecting great data is how you frame that story and how you tell it, thinking about who your audience is, what your goals are, what opportunities or problems you're trying to solve. The chances are in a lot of rural communities, they've heard this story many times. These are the things we need in our community for economic development, outdoor recreation economy, a good quality of life. And so thinking about that context and key players, and then finding those solutions and sharing that story is a whole nother skill set. And really connecting the data with the story together. Oftentimes you may just have a few people in a community really advocating for something, and they've been heard a lot. So what's great about this data and the reports that are coming out is that you actually have data to support your advocacy work and the benefits that that'll have to the community. Next. These are examples of how to use the data. I want to give a shout out to Rachel Schaus. She is our communication science director at the University of Montana and my research institute. She did a phenomenal job with this in the report, but I just want to share with you, don't feel like you have to do it all. We hired someone to do this, to bring all the data together and to tell those stories. And so thinking about in your community, who has those skills and who can do that. Our attention span keeps getting shorter and shorter. And so based on your different audience, how can you take something like this and make something really shareable, easy to understand, and distribute that? So I can't emphasize that enough, that part one is getting all the right data. The second part is just really thinking through how to tell that story and who your audience is. Next. So this is super exciting. I just want you to know we've been waiting to get this out for a few years, but there's more coming. So when we look at the upcoming data, you will have, as John mentioned in the chat, more regional data, county-wide data. There'll be a spreadsheet model to allow for estimations of impacts to communities when you propose a new recreation infrastructure project. This is really groundbreaking. I want to emphasize this. It's super exciting work. I know now that I'm in the Northwest Rockies in a very similar extraction economy, we see this rural capacity needed and these tools needed. And so I think this is going to really build a foundation for many people across the country. In addition, Brad's going to talk about this a little bit more, but these tools will be launched at a Building Outdoor Communities workshop in May. I'm super excited. I'll be coming back to North Carolina. So there's a lot of things to look forward to. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Brad. You can see our information. It's also, you can look us up on our university websites, take a screenshot or a picture, but feel free to reach out at any time.
All right. Thank you, Melissa, John, and Ash. This is so exciting. And you're all probably wondering, well, what does it look like next? This is really kind of, excuse me, it's launching us into a whole new phase of the Building Outdoor Communities program as we kind of finish up the cohort, the 7-month cohort series. The third cohort is in month 6. So by the time we start to do this next round, all the cohorts will have finished. That's 19 counties will have gone through the 7-month capacity building portion of the program. But this information is accessible to all participants, all communities, 25 counties and the Koala Boundary, whether or not you participated in the 7-month portion. So with that being said, we are going to be hosting a BOC, Building Outdoor Communities Spring Roadshow across Western North Carolina. We're still figuring out all the details, but you can see the weeks of April 15th and the 22nd. We're going to go to 7 locations, and you can see here is where we're going to go. I'm going to send invitations to the BOC working groups. Again, whether you're in the capacity building portion or not, I'm going to send information to everyone. And it's going to be at those meetings where we present the county level data. We're going to be providing infographics for you to use at the county level. And then really just sitting down and talking about how can we adapt the data, like Melissa was saying, to diverse stakeholders, to nonprofits, to elected leaders, you know, to the TDA. How do we market it the right way? And then, as Melissa just mentioned, in May, save the dates, put it on your calendars right now, May 13th. At McDowell Tech, we are going to have a Building Outdoor Communities workshop and celebration. The details are forthcoming, and this will be an amazing time for all of us to reconvene after our original launch event back in September 2022, and to talk about what projects have been funded, talk about all the tools that have been created, and where do we go from here? How can the Made by Mountains team evolve to continue to support all this amazing work happening in Western North Carolina? So, and that goes along with the economic analysis tools to kind of further adapt the story to your particular infrastructure projects that you're trying to advance. So stay tuned for more details there. So I'm now going to turn it over to our newest member of the team. Made by Mountains was awarded an Economic Development Fellow from an EDA Economic Development Recovery Program. Her name is Allison Smith, and we're so grateful to have her for additional capacity. And she's going to facilitate some questions and respond to your answers in the chat.
Thanks for the intro, Brad. It's awesome to be here, and I'm looking forward to collaborating with many of you in the coming years. So we're going to shift to the Q&A portion of the webinar, and due to the large volume of participants today, we're gonna ask that you please post those questions using the chat function. And then we'll share those out. So it looks like many of the questions we've had have already been answered, but just to provide a recap of those questions while you all can think and maybe post some additional in the chat. Lee Henderson Hill asked whether visitors actually whether the data reflected where visitors actually slept for the evening or what the criteria was for that information. And she was wondering, or they were wondering, was there a way to capture sites, destinations enjoyed while those visitors were in the area? And so Melissa and John chimed in and said that the survey did not ask specific questions about sites visited, mainly because the purpose was an economic study, and that would have made the survey much longer. John added that we do have some information on sites visited within each county, and those numbers will be released later in the spring. So Ann Bass also asked, was the listing of Cherokee as a destination Cherokee County or Cherokee Town as part of the boundary? The answer there was that the destinations were counties and the Qualla boundary. So when we're referencing Cherokee, that's Cherokee County. And then we also had a question from Michael Wall during Ash's portion of the presentation. Michael asked, is the output column inclusive of the income column? And then John responded, or sorry, Ash responded that those are separate metrics used to describe the total effect. So there are 4.9 billion in sales, which translate to roughly 48,000 jobs and 1.5 billion in income. So it looks like the questions have been answered up to this point. So feel free to continue to post those in the chat. Oh, we have one from Hannah. So Hannah asked, how is the short-term rental percentage determined? 10% seems low for Western North Carolina. So Ash, John, or Melissa, would one of you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, that just comes from the breakdown. There's the question about overnight stays, and we showed earlier that the different categories. So that was just what was reported. The 10% of those reported staying short-term rentals.
Thanks, Ash. Awesome. Well, I will transition back over to, or I'll throw the mic back over to Brad, but continue to post those questions in the chat and we can discuss those in the last 20 minutes or so that we have together today. And also, as you marinate on this information, if questions come up, always feel free to send those to the Made by Mountains team, and we'll make sure that your question gets where it needs to go and gets answered. So Brad, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Allison. John or Ash, could you speak to just a little bit more about popular activities that, because we had numerous popular activities from each county that were inserted into the survey, and those details will be provided on the county level reports. But can you just, one of you, speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I will. Let me find that table in the report. And I apologize. Goodness, I can't find it.
Well, it's more so I was talking about you know how each people were able to put like popular recreation destinations. And I think that's important when, there were a lot of we have that data captured as well. I just want people to make sure that that's known.
Yeah, so the question we asked was, so you went to this county and we assume that if whatever the destination county is, and if it's an overnight trip, that's where they spent the night. And then we asked, while you were in this county, what did you do? And so people could answer more than one activity. And then in the report, table 3, we present more activities than are in the presentation. We have scenic driving, swimming, motorized boating, RV camping, backpacking, road cycling, kayaking, etc., birding, climbing, and trail running. And in addition to the activities that were presented in the report, all of those have a number of 10% or greater. So on all of the trips that people took, 10% or more of those trips participate in these other activities. And then there's another list of activities that are below 10%, just about everything you could think of, at least that we could think of. And then we had the Building Outdoor Communities participants review the survey, and then they told us activities that we weren't familiar with. So, and then was there a second part of the question, Brad?
No, that was perfect. But just
Okay.
we can talk more in detail about like county specific places when we're in person at the roadshow. So any other questions that came through, Allison?
Yeah, we had a few more come in. So Adam was wondering, did the survey ask detailed information on where visitors were traveling to? Is that state information, those 5 or 6 states that were mentioned, does the survey get any more specific than that?
Yes, we know the origin zip codes of the travelers. And we have not looked at that very closely, but that's a future analysis that if there's interest out there, and there might be, that we'd be happy to report in one way or another.
Thanks, John. We have a question from Rod. He's wondering, are the questions asked to determine the destinations available?
Yes, and we can also provide the internet questionnaire, a PDF of that. We can provide that one way or another.
So
you can see everything.
cool. And then we had a question just come in from Anne. Were you able to discern how much traveling to activities within the region occurred beyond where the party stayed, and maybe some analysis by which might have been included most?
So this is one of those things that it would have been great to collect data on, but it's such a big region. And there's time constraints on these questionnaires. We just weren't able to. So what we did was we asked people, we asked them for their destination, and we said, if you traveled to more than one of these counties or the Qualla boundary, tell us about what you did in the county or the destination where you spent the most time. And so for each of those counties, we came up with a list of destinations within the county or things to do. And we just had people check off the specific recreation sites or areas that they visited within that county. And so we know for each county what a typical visit to that county may look like in terms of what they did. But we don't know anything beyond that. Like, what town did you stay in within the county? And from there, did you go to point A and then point B? We don't have any, we don't know the travel patterns like that.
Thanks, John. And then we have some really great thoughts from Ryan Olson. And Ryan says they're wondering if a more pointed survey of outdoor recreationists would provide more recreation specific findings. So Ryan is saying that it seems like some of the counties where there are popular recreation sites, there are other counties noted as being more visited, with little public recreation scored pretty highly. And so he also says maybe this speaks to the fact that people are focused on where they're staying and not necessarily where they're going throughout the day.
Yes, that is certainly a possibility.
Any other questions?
I'll
Oop.
pop in while we see if any other questions come into the chat, but really excited about the roadshow and the opportunity. You know, we've got a lot of information here that was presented from John and Ash today that then we've also kind of boiled down high level info into the infographic that you see. However, you have this multi-page report that you are welcome to also dig into. But really great information here. And I think when we, you know, hit the road in April and come into community, we're going to have the opportunity to dive in even more deeply into the county specific data and the questions that a lot of folks have had of like, where are people going? You know, is it the boat ramp? Is it the trail? Is it the bike park? And when we talk about really being strategic about our planning and where we're investing our dollars, this information and this data is really going to help with that planning. So excited to have that chance to have those conversations with you all. And, you know, another piece of that is we know that a lot of our community leaders are hoping that they can continue to see this economic impact and the opportunity to grow their business community through outdoor recreation. And so I want to just also share an opportunity that's coming up next week. I know a lot of folks know that we work with the business community closely, and we have a Waypoint Accelerator program that really helps businesses grow. And we have a graduation that's next week at the Mule in Asheville of our 5th cohort of businesses. So really amazing outfitters, guides, product designers who will be there sharing more about their business and, you know, what they're growing, how they're growing, and what they want in a business community. And maybe they're looking for a place to kind of lay deeper roots. So I'll send an invite in the chat for that as well.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for your presence this morning, and we hope this data can be useful for you in some way. Remember, it's all on the website, the regional report and the information sheet if you want to share this with elected leaders or stakeholders. Remember to follow us on our social media page to stay up to date. Our communications and brand manager, Joanna Brown, she's really creative with all the social media posting, and so make sure you follow that to stay in the know. You can always reach out to us. Amy and my contact information is here. So yes, it's been a pleasure to really dive into this information, and we're excited to see you in April and May. Thank you.